In the future, humans don't go outside anymore and instead send out androids called surrogates to go through their daily routines. People control their surrogates from the comfort of their homes by using special chairs that connect them to the androids through neuropathic signals. If the surrogate is damaged, the person doesn't feel any pain, but they do experience all the pleasures the surrogates engage in. This allows people to make their surrogates all kinds of crazy stunts. They also can choose how they look, and now everyone on the streets looks young and beautiful. Crime and sickness quickly go down and society is losing its hate. However, a group of people called Dreads think surrogates equal living in a lie, so they fight against their use and live in small isolation zones. Their leader is known as the Prophet, and he often makes broadcasts asking people to leave the chairs behind. One night in the city, a rich guy goes to a club and jumps into a crowd to then flirt with a woman, who he takes to an alley so they can share some kissing. At that moment, a strange figure shows up and electrocutes both of them, destroying the surrogates before escaping away on a bike. The killer drives so fast that it causes a car to flip and crash. Moments later, FBI agents Peters and Greer arrive at the crime scene. A cop informs them that the male victim isn't a registered surrogate but the female one is, however the owner hasn't made any reports. Both surrogates' eyes have been burned out and the memory chip on the male one is fried, but Greer still takes it to analyze it. Then the agents get into the apartment of the female surrogate's owner, only to find him dead with a bleeding nose. When they check the controllers, they discover that the last thing the female surrogate saw was her partner's eyes burning down before the feed was cut off. Afterward, Greer goes home and gets a glass of water to himself, confirming he also uses a surrogate. While the android parks itself in the closet, the real Greer leaves the control chair and enters a kid's room, where he stares at a picture of him with his wife and their child. Next, he checks on his wife Maggie, who communicates with him through her surrogate. Greer wants to take a vacation without using the android bodies. He wants to travel for real. He also points out they haven't actually been together for a while, only their surrogates meet each other, and Maggie says it's better this way. The next morning, some students find Jared dead and covered in blood on his chair, meaning he was the person behind the destroyed male surrogate. Moments later, Greer's boss Andrew shares the details with the agents. 2 people have died because of an attack received by their surrogates. Later, Greer and Peters check the footage from the surrogates' memories and notice a man with a weapon, so they conclude this was probably homicide. Then they get a call informing them that Jared was the son of Lionel, the father of surrogacy. His company VSI, or Virtual Self Industries, is one of the biggest in the world. However, Lionel was fired by his partners almost a decade ago. Since then, Lionel has been a recluse. The agents still find his location and pay Lionel a visit. They're met by one of Lionel's surrogates, who explains he's always been estranged from Jared. He also gave Jared one of his surrogates when he went to college, hoping it could help them bond. Peters asks a bunch of questions that make Lionel angry, so Greer tries to calm him down by showing sympathy because he also lost a son. When Greer asks if anyone would want to harm Lionel or Jared, Lionel realizes the killer had been trying to get him and hadn't known the surrogate was under Jared's control. Suddenly, the surrogate goes off and Lionel appears sitting on his chair as he has a breakdown because he caused his son's death. Afterward, Greer and Peters go to VSI to ask the representatives about people dying from their surrogates getting destroyed. The representatives get offended and swear the surrogates have fail-safes to avoid such problems. Next, the agents show the fried chip to an engineer, who inspects it and explains the only thing that could cause that is getting all the circuits fried at once. He also shows them that recently they received a truck of surrogates from the military with their optics and identity chips missing. The agents then go to a military camp, where a bunch of surrogate soldiers use the surrogates to fight in a war far away. When a surrogate is destroyed by a shot, the human controlling it just comes back in with a new one. A colonel tells the agents that the weapons used by the military can't affect the people controlling them. He also reveals that the military removes certain parts to keep for analysis. Later at the station, Peters finally identifies the man with the weapon as Miles, a guy who doesn't use surrogates. Soon technician Bobby, who doesn't use a surrogate either, informs them that the monitoring department has found Miles thanks to the FBI having access to all the surrogates' feeds in the city. Peters stays with Bobby to keep track of Miles' movements while Greer rushes to join the pursuit team. Suddenly, an alarm goes off and Bobby sees a man harming a woman in a hotel, so he immediately gets a disconnection warrant to shut those surrogates down. Peters is shocked to learn this can be done and questions the morality and legality behind it, worried about the software potentially falling into the wrong hands. Meanwhile, Miles rides his bike through the city as the cops chase after him on cars and Greer follows them on a helicopter. The bike allows Mike to pull off some crazy moves and go through narrow spaces to gain an advantage, but eventually he is cornered and crashes into an alley, allowing the police to immediately surround him. Miles suddenly pulls out a weapon and shoots at the officers, hitting them with a wave of electricity that makes the surrogates convulse as their eyes pop out. Then he shoots at the helicopter, so Greer quickly disconnects while the pilot is hit by the electricity, causing the helicopter to start spinning down. Miles quickly makes his way to a dread settlement, only for the helicopter to crash on it. At that moment, Greer gets back into his surrogate and crashes into the dread zone as well. Thankfully, he comes out with just a broken arm and immediately goes after Miles, but when the dreads see there's a surrogate in their area, they get angry and start chasing Greer too. As they all run through different sectors of the slums, Miles keeps trying to use his weapon again, but it isn't working. To gain the upper hand, Greer jumps and climbs over various structures, getting hit by a truck in the process. Since he can't feel pain, he just keeps going until he finally manages to corner Miles and ask for the weapon. Miles gives him his bag, but before Greer can open it, he suddenly gets shot. While Miles takes the bag back, a woman continues to shoot Greer and calls him an abomination, causing him to disconnect from his surrogate. At home, Greer is bleeding and tries to leave his room, only to pass out in the corridor. Luckily, Maggie finds him and calls an ambulance. Sometime later, Miles wakes up and discovers the Prophet and his men in his house looking for the weapon. The Prophet wants to know where the weapon comes from, so Miles confesses he has no idea. An anonymous person contacts him through disposable phones and pays him to use the weapon, but that's all he knows. Soon news outlets announce that the Prophet sees the fallen helicopter as a personal attack on the Dreads and declares a revolution against the Surrogate Society. At the hospital, Greer also wakes up and learns from Andrew that he's been suspended. Furious, Greer breaks out of the hospital and meets with Peters, but as they walk he starts getting dizzy. It seems it's a side effect of using a surrogate for so long. Peters tries to get him a new surrogate, but those random models don't feel right. Greer decides to go to the Dread colony and is allowed in, thanks to his real body. As he looks around, he's disturbed to see his surrogate crucified. He also learns that Miles died, so he attends the funeral. The Prophet offers a speech and reminds everyone that death is a sign of true humanity, which androids don't have. After the funeral, Greer tries to approach the Prophet, only for his thugs to beat him up while the Prophet reminds him that feeling pain is the actual human experience. When Greer asks about the weapon, the Prophet laughs and answers with sarcasm, causing Greer to leave. Then the Prophet enters his trailer and reveals he's got the weapon hidden under his floor. In the meantime, Greer is picked up by another of Lionel's surrogates, who explains he's using a new model because his life is in danger. Greer tells him that Jareed's murderer was killed by the Prophet and shares his own story. His son died in a car accident, and there's nothing worse in the world than a parent outliving their child. Lionel points out that if they find where the weapon comes from, they'll discover who is trying to kill him. It couldn't have come from the Dreads because they lack the resources. When Greer gets home, he finds Maggie having a wild party with friends. In private, he argues with her because he wants to see the real her and not the hedonist surrogate. Maggie says she's changed and it can't be done. On his way out, Greer gets frustrated and beats a partygoer up until he sees the metal under the fake skin. After Greer leaves, Maggie's surrogate goes to look at the real body on the chair. Maggie takes off the goggles and cries. Greer returns to headquarters and learns that the VSI made a weapon contract with the military, but it was terminated and the reason is classified. In the evening, a surrogate breaks into Peter's home to check all her chair recordings and learns about Bobby's software that can shut down all the surrogates. Then he shoots Peter several times before taking her system and connecting it to a new person. At headquarters, Peter's surrogate is ready to act. The next day Greer meets with the colonel again and shows him a picture of the weapon. The colonel admits that's the weapon the military commissioned, but all prototypes were supposedly destroyed after they discovered they were killing the people behind the surrogates too. When Greer informs him that the Dreads have the weapon, the colonel announces the military will be in charge of getting it back. At the Dread zone, the Prophet gives the weapon to his men and orders them to give it to Peters. Later Greer tries to talk to Maggie about their relationship and the loss of their son. Maggie gets frustrated and points out she's only alive today thanks to the surrogate providing an escape from real life. When Greer insists on trying to discuss the matter, Maggie logs out of her surrogate and the real her takes some medicine. Soon the military is invading the Dread zone to retrieve the weapon. As the locals panic and run to hide, the Prophet and his men try to escape, only to be cornered by the soldiers. Both sides immediately open fire, but the military has more men and weapons, so the Prophet's group is quickly overpowered. The Prophet gets shot in the process, and when the soldiers approach him, they're shocked to see he's a surrogate. It turns out Lionel has been controlling the Prophet all along. Meanwhile Greer meets with Peters, who tells him Miles had been hired by Andrew to kill Lionel. Greer immediately goes to the headquarters to confront Andrew, deducing that the VSI gave him the weapon to kill Lionel for his anti-surrogate movement. When Andrew looks away, Greer stabs him in the back of the head, causing the surrogate to shut down. Then Greer checks Andrew's computer and downloads all the information related to the conspiracy. As Greer leaves the building, the real Andrew calls the other agents and tells them to arrest Greer for assault. Afterward Greer meets with Peters in her car, still not suspecting a new person is behind the surrogate. Greer explains that Andrew's files revealed Lionel is funding the anti-surrogacy movement and that he's found the codes necessary to activate the special weapon. Peters calls headquarters to tell them where to find Greer, and suddenly a truck hits them, sending the car off the road. As Peters walks away with the weapon and the access codes, Greer goes after her and a brutal chase begins that causes many accidents and lots of destruction on the streets. Peters' surrogate body allows her to dodge it with amazing jumps, and Greer ends up crashing into a store, so Peters gets to escape. Soon a bunch of FBI agents show up looking for Greer, so he hides and sneaks around to steal a car. Then he calls Bobby and asks him to shut Peters' surrogate down, but it's too late. Peters got to him first and handcuffed Bobby. Now Peters is trying to access the entire surrogate network. At that moment Andrew finds her and tries making her see reason, only to learn Lionel is controlling her. A desperate Andrew tries to convince Lionel that surrogates are good for humanity, but Lionel wants people to live like actual humans and fires the weapon to kill Andrew as revenge for his son's death. Next Peters starts uploading a virus to the surrogate network, intending to kill every person using one. Moments later Greer breaks into Lionel's house and shoots the surrogate guards to force his way inside. He searches the house and eventually finds a hidden door that he goes through, finding a room filled with surrogates, including the Prophet and Peters' killer. Lionel is in a wheelchair pointing a gun at Greer and explains that people inside surrogates are already dead anyway, so he's doing humanity a favor. The computer announces the virus upload is done, so a satisfied Lionel self-deletes with a chemical compound. Then Greer takes Lionel off the chair and connects to Peters' surrogate. He immediately calls Bobby, who gives him instructions on how to stop the virus. With only 1 second left, Greer manages to interrupt the transmission and saves all the human users, but the virus still reaches the surrogates and is about to destroy them all. Bobby wants to teach Greer how to stop that too, however Greer allows it to go on so the world can be free from the surrogates. As the virus goes active, an FBI agent arrives and shoots Peters' surrogate. Soon surrogates all over the world shut down and start falling, filling the streets and buildings with lifeless robots. Greer leaves Lionel's house and watches how people are coming out feeling woozy and confused. Once he makes it home, Greer finally gets to hug the real Maggie again. The news announced surrogates don't work anymore but no person got hurt, so now humanity has to get used to living again.